Chapter 13. "We never seem to have old-fashioned winters nowadays, do we, Mummy?" said Walter gloomily. For the November snow had gone long ago, and all through December Glen St. Mary had been a black and somber land, rimmed in by a gray gulf dotted with curling crests of ice-white foam. There had been only a few sunny days when the harbor sparkled in the golden arms of the hills. The rest had been dour and hard-bitten. In vain had the Ingleside folks hoped for snow for Christmas, but preparations went steadily on, and as the last week drew to a close, Ingleside was full of mystery and secrets and whispers and delicious smells. Now, on the very day before Christmas, everything was ready. The fir tree Walter and Jem had brought up from the hollow was in the corner of the living room. The doors and windows were hung with big green wreaths tied with huge bows of red ribbon. The banisters were twined with creeping spruce, and Susan's pantry was crammed to overflowing. Then, late in the afternoon, when they had all resigned themselves to a dingy green Christmas, somebody looked out the window and saw white flakes as big as feathers falling thickly. "Snow! Snow! Snow!" shouted Jem. "A white Christmas after all, Mummy!" The Ingleside children went to bed happy. It was so nice to snuggle down warm and cozy and listen to the storm howling outside through the gray, snowy night. Anne and Susan went to work to deck the Christmas tree, acting like two children themselves, thought Aunt Mary Maria scornfully. She did not approve of candles on a tree. Suppose the house caught fire from them. She did not approve of colored balls. Suppose the twins ate them. But nobody paid any attention to her. They had learned that that was the only condition on which life with Aunt Mary Maria was livable. "Finished!" cried Anne as she fastened the great silver star to the top of the proud little fir. "And oh, Susan, does it look pretty? Isn't it nice we can all be children again at Christmas without being ashamed of it? I'm so glad snow came, but I hope the storm won't outlast the night." "It's going to storm all day tomorrow," said Aunt Mary Maria positively. "I can tell by my poor back." Anne went through the hall, opened the big front door, and peered out. The world was lost in a white passion of snowstorm. The window panes were gray with drifted snow. The Scotch pine was an enormous sheeted ghost. "It doesn't look very promising," Anne admitted ruefully. "God manages the weather yet, Mrs. Dr. dear, and not Miss Mary Maria Blythe," said Susan over her shoulder. "I hope there won't be a sick call tonight at least," said Anne as she turned away. Susan took one parting look into the gloom before she locked out the stormy night. "Don't you go and have a baby tonight," she warned darkly in the direction of the upper glen where Mrs. George Drew was expecting her forth. In spite of Aunt Mary Maria's back, the storm spent itself into the night, and morning filled the secret hollow of snow among the hills with the red wine of winter sunrise. All the small fry were up early, looking starry and expectant. "Did Santa get through the storm, Mommy?" "No, he was sick and didn't dare try," said Aunt Mary Maria, who was in a good humor for her and felt jokey. "Santa Claus got here all right," said Susan before their eyes had time to blur, "and after you've had your breakfast, you'll see what he did to your tree." After breakfast, Dad mysteriously disappeared, but nobody missed him because they were so taken up with the tree. The lively tree, all gold and silver bubbles and lighted candles in the still dark room, with parcels in all colors and tied with the loveliest ribbons piled about it. Then Santa appeared, a gorgeous Santa, all crimson and white fur with a long white beard and such a jolly big stomach. Susan had stuffed 3 cushions into the red velveteen cassock Anne had made for Gilbert. Shirley screamed with terror at first, but refused to be taken out for all that. Santa distributed all the gifts with a funny little speech for everyone in a voice that sounded oddly familiar, even through the mask. And then, just at the end, his beard caught fire from a candle, and Aunt Mary Maria had some slight satisfaction out of the incident, though not enough to prevent her from sighing mournfully. "Ah, me. Christmas isn't what it was when I was a child." She looked with disapproval at the present little Elizabeth had sent Anne from Paris, a beautiful little bronze reproduction of Artemis of the silver bow. "What shameless hussy is that?" she inquired sternly. "The goddess Diana," said Anne, exchanging a grin with Gilbert. "Oh, a heathen! Well, that's different, I suppose. But if I were you, Annie, I wouldn't leave it where the children can see it. Sometimes I'm beginning to think there's no such thing as modesty left in the world. My grandmother," concluded Aunt Mary Maria with a delightful inconsequence that characterized so many of her remarks, "never wore less than 3 petticoats, winter and summer." Aunt Mary Maria had knitted wristers for all the children out of a dreadful shade of magenta yarn, also a sweater for Anne. Gilbert received a bilious necktie, and Susan got a red flannel petticoat. Even Susan considered red flannel petticoats out of date, but she thanked Aunt Mary Maria gallantly. Some poor home missionary may be the better of it, she thought. 3 petticoats indeed. I flatter myself I am a decent woman, and I like that silver bow person. She may not have much in the way of clothes on, but if I had a figure like that, I do not know that I would want to hide it. But now to see about the turkey stuffing. Not that it would amount to much with no onion in it. Ingleside was full of happiness that day, just plain old-fashioned happiness, in spite of Aunt Mary Maria, who certainly did not like to see people too happy. White meat only, please. James, eat your soup quietly. You're not the carver your father was, Gilbert. He could give everyone the bit she liked best. Twins, older people would like a chance now and then to get a word in edgewise. I was brought up by the rule that children should be seen and not heard. No, thank you, Gilbert. No salad for me. I don't eat raw food. Yes, Annie, I'll take a little pudding. Mince pies are entirely too indigestible. Susan's mince pies are poems, just as her apple pies are lyrics, said the doctor. Give me a piece of both, Anne girl. Do you really like to be called a girl at your age, Annie? Walter, you haven't eaten all your bread and butter. Plenty of poor children would be glad to have it. James, dear, blow your nose and have it over with. I cannot endure sniffling. But it was a gay and lovely Christmas. Even Aunt Mary Maria thawed out a little after dinner, said almost graciously that the presents given her had been quite nice, and even endured the shrimp with an air of patient martyrdom that made them all feel a little ashamed of loving him. I think our little folks have had a nice time, said Anne happily that night, as she looked at the pattern of trees woven against the white hills and sunset sky, and the children out on the lawn, busily scattering crumbs for birds over the snow. The wind was sighing softly in the boughs, sending flurries over the lawn and promising more storm for the morrow, but Ingleside had had its day. I suppose they had, agreed Aunt Mary Maria. I'm sure they did enough squealing anyhow. As for what they've eaten, well, you're only young once, and I suppose you have plenty of castor oil in the house. Chapter 14. It was what Susan called a streaky winter, all thaws and freezes that kept Ingleside decorated with fantastic fringes of icicles. The children fed 7 blue jays who came regularly to the orchard for their rations, and let Jem pick them out, though they flew from everybody else. Anne sat up nights to pore over seed catalogues in January and February. Then the winds of March swirled over the dunes and up the harbors and over the hills. Rabbits, said Susan, were laying Easter eggs. Isn't March an inciting month, Mummy? Cried Jem, who was a little brother to all the winds that blew. They could have spared the incitement of Jem scratching his hand on a rusty nail and having a nasty time of it for some days, while Aunt Mary Maria told all the stories of blood poisoning she'd ever heard. But that, Anne reflected, when the danger was over, was what you must expect with a small son who was always trying experiments. And lo, it was April, with the laughter of April rain, the whisper of April rain, the trickle, the sweep, the drive, the lash, the dance, the splash of April rain. Oh, Mummy, hasn't the world got its face washed nice and clean? Cried Di, and the morning sunshine returned. There were pale spring stars shining over fields of mist. There were pussy willows in the marsh. Even the little twigs on the trees seemed all at once to have lost their clear, cold quality and to have become soft and languorous. The first robin was an event. The hollow was once more a place full of wild, free delight. Jem brought his mother the first Mayflowers, rather to Aunt Mary Maria's offense, since she thought they should have been offered to her. Susan began sorting over the attic shelves, and Anne, who had hardly had a minute to herself all winter, put on spring gladness as a garment and literally lived in her garden, while the shrimp showed his spring raptures by writhing all over the paths. You care more for that garden than you do for your husband, Annie, said Aunt Mary Maria. My garden is so kind to me, answered Anne dreamily, then realizing the implications that might be taken out of her remark, began to laugh. You do say the most extraordinary things, Annie. Of course, I know you don't mean that Gilbert isn't kind, but what if a stranger heard you say such a thing? Dear Aunt Mary Maria, said Anne gaily, I'm really not responsible for the things I say this time of year. Everybody around here knows that. I'm always a little mad in spring, but it's such a divine madness. Do you notice those mists over the dunes like dancing witches? And the daffodils? We've never had such a show of daffodils at Ingleside before. I don't care much for daffodils. They are such flaunting things, said Aunt Mary Maria, drawing her shawl around her and going indoors to protect her back. Do you know, Mrs. Doctor dear, said Susan ominously, what has become of those new irises you wanted to plant in that shady corner? She planted them this afternoon where you were out when you were out, right in the sunniest part of the backyard. Oh, Susan, and we can't move them because she'd be so hurt. If you will just give me the word, Mrs. Doctor dear. No, Susan, we'll leave them there for the time being. She cried, you remember, when I hinted that she should have pruned the spirea before blooming. But sneering at our daffodils, Mrs. Doctor dear, and them famous all around the harbor. And deserve to be. Look at them laughing at you for minding Aunt Mary Maria. Susan, the nasturtiums are coming up in this corner after all. It's such fun when you've given up hope of a thing to find it has suddenly popped up. I'm going to have a little rose garden made in the southwest corner. The very name of rose garden thrills to my toes. Did you ever see such a blueness of sky before, Susan? And if you listen very carefully now at night, you can hear all the little brooks of the countryside gossiping. I've half a notion to sleep in the hollow tonight with a pillow of wild violets. You would find it very damp, said Susan patiently. Mrs. Doctor was always like this in the spring. It would pass. Susan, said Anne coaxingly, I want to have a birthday party next week. Well, and why should you not? Asked Susan. To be sure, none of the family had a birthday the last week in May, but if Mrs. Doctor wanted a birthday party, why boggle over that? For Aunt Mary Maria, went on Anne, as one determined to get the worst over. Her birthday's next week. Gilbert says she's 55, and I've been thinking, Mrs. Doctor dear, do you really mean to get up a party for that? Count 100, Susan. Count 100, Susan dear. It would please her so. What has she in life, after all? That is her own fault. Perhaps so, but Susan, I really want to do this for her. Mrs. Doctor dear, Susan said ominously, you have always been kind enough to give me a week's vacation whenever I feel I need it. Perhaps I had better take it next week. I will ask my niece Gladys to come and help you out, and then Miss Mary Maria Blythe can have a dozen birthday parties for all of me. If you feel like that about it, Susan, I'll give up the idea, of course, said Anne slowly. Mrs. Doctor dear, that woman has foisted herself upon you and means to stay here forever. She has worried you and henpecked the doctor and made the children's lives miserable. I say nothing about myself, for who am I? She has scolded and nagged and insinuated and whined, and now you want to get up a birthday party for her? Well, all I can say is if you want to do that, well, just have to go ahead and have it. Susan, you old duck. Plotting and planning followed. Susan, having yielded, was determined that for the honor of Ingleside, the party must be something that even Mary Maria Blythe could not find fault with. I think we'll have a luncheon, Susan. Then they'll be away early enough for me to go to the concert at Lowbridge with the doctor. We'll keep it a secret and surprise her. She shan't know a thing about it till the last minute. I'll invite all the people in the Glen she likes. And who may they be, Mrs. Doctor dear? Well, tolerates then. And her cousin Adela Carey from Lowbridge and some people from town will have a big plummy birthday cake with 55 candles on it, which I am to make, of course. Susan, you know you make the best fruitcake in P.E. Island. I know that I'm as wax in your hands, Mrs. Doctor dear. A mysterious week followed. An air of hush-hush pervaded Ingleside. Everybody was sworn not to give the secret away to Aunt Mary Maria, but Anne and Susan had reckoned without gossip. The night before the party, Aunt Mary Maria came home from a call in the Glen to find them sitting rather wearily in the unlighted sunroom. All in the dark, Annie. It beats me how anyone can like sitting in the dark. It gives me the blues. It isn't dark, it's twilight. There has been a love match between light and dark, and beautiful exceedingly is the offspring thereof, said Anne, more to herself than anybody else. I suppose you know what you mean yourself, Annie. And so you're having a party tomorrow. Anne suddenly sat bolt upright. Susan, already sitting so, could not sit any uprighter. What? Why, Auntie, you always leave me to hear things from outsiders, said Aunt Mary Maria, but seemingly more in sorrow than in anger. We meant it as a surprise, Auntie. I don't know what you want of a party this time of year when you can't depend on weather, Annie. Anne drew a breath of relief. Evidently, Aunt Mary Maria knew only that there was to be a party, not that it had any connection with her. I wanted to have it before the spring flowers were done, Auntie. I shall wear my garnet taffeta, I suppose, Annie. If I had not heard of this in the village, I should have been caught by all your fine friends tomorrow in a cotton dress. Oh, no, Auntie. We meant to tell you in time to dress, of course. Well, if my advice means anything to you, Annie, and sometimes I am almost compelled to think it does not, I would say that in the future it would be better for you not to be quite so secretive about things. By the way, are you aware that they are saying in the village that it was Jem who threw the stone through the window of the Methodist church? He did not, said Anne quietly. He told me he did not. Are you sure, Annie dear, that he was not fibbing? Annie dear still spoke quietly. Quite sure, Aunt Mary Maria. Jem has never told me an untruth in his life. Well, I thought you ought to know what was being said. Aunt Mary Maria stalked off in her usual gracious manner, ostentatiously avoiding the shrimp, who was lying on his back on the floor, entreating someone to tickle his stomach. Susan and Anne drew a long breath. I think I'll go to bed, Susan, and I do hope it is going to be fine tomorrow. I don't like the look of that dark cloud over the harbor. It will be fine, Mrs. Doctor, dear, reassured Susan. The almanac says so. Susan had an almanac which foretold the whole year's weather and was right often enough to keep up its credit. Leave the side door unlocked for the doctor, Susan. He may be late getting home from town. He went in for the roses. 55 golden roses, Susan. I've heard Aunt Mary Maria say that yellow roses were the only flowers she liked. Half an hour later, Susan, reading her nightly chapter in her Bible, came across the verse, Withdraw thy foot from thy neighbor's house, lest he weary of thee and hate thee. She put a sprig of southernwood in it to mark the spot. Even in those days, she reflected. Anne and Susan were both up early, desiring to complete certain last preparations before Aunt Mary Maria should be about. Anne always liked to get up early and catch that mystical half hour before sunrise when the world belonged to the fairies and the old gods. She liked to see the morning sky of pale rose and gold behind the church spire, the thin, translucent glow of sunrise spreading over the dunes, the first violet spirals of smoke floating up from the village roofs. It's as if we had a day made to order, Mrs. Doctor dear, says Susan complacently, as she feathered an orange frosted cake with coconut. I will try my hand at them newfangled butterballs after breakfast, and I will phone Carter Flagg every half hour to make sure that he will not forget the ice cream. And there will be time to scrub the veranda steps. Is that necessary, Susan? Mrs. Doctor dear, you have invited Mrs. Marshall Elliott, have you not? She shall not see our veranda steps other than spotless. But you will see to the decorations, Mrs. Doctor dear. I was not born with the gift of arranging flowers. 4 cakes? Gee, said Jem. When we give a party, said Susan grandly, we give a party. The guests came in due time and were received by Aunt Mary Maria in garnet taffeta and by Anne in biscuit-colored voile. Anne thought of putting on her white muslin for the day was summer warm, but decided otherwise. Very sensible of you, Annie, commented Aunt Mary Maria. White, I always say, is only for the young. Everything went according to schedule. The table looked beautiful with Anne's prettiest dishes and the exotic beauty of white and purple iris. Susan's butterballs made a sensation, nothing like them having been seen in the Glen before. Her cream soup was the last word in soups. The chicken salad had been made of Ingleside. Chickens are chickens. The badgered Carter Flagg sent up the ice cream on the tick of the dot. Finally, Susan, bearing the birthday cake with its 55 lighted candles as if it were the Baptist's head on a charger, marched in and set it down before Aunt Mary Maria. Anne, outwardly the smiling, serene hostess, had been feeling very uncomfortable for some time. In spite of all outward smoothness, she had ever-deepening conviction that something had gone terribly wrong. On the guest's arrival, she had been too much occupied to notice the change that came over Aunt Mary Maria's face when Mrs. Marshall Elliott cordially wished her many happy returns of the day. But when they were all finally seated around the table, Anne wakened up to the fact that Aunt Mary Maria was looking anything but pleased. She was actually white. It couldn't be with fury, and not one word did she say as the meal progressed, save curt replies to remarks addressed to her. She took only 2 spoonfuls of soup and 3 mouthfuls of salad. As for the ice cream, she behaved to it as if it wasn't there. When Susan set the birthday cake with its flickering candles down before her, Aunt Mary Maria gave a fearful gulp which was not quite successful in swallowing a sob, and consequently issued as a strangled whoop. "Auntie, are you feeling well?" cried Anne. Aunt Mary Maria stared at her icily. "Quite well, Annie. Remarkably well, indeed, for such an aged person as myself." At this auspicious moment, the twins popped in, carrying between them the basket full of 55 yellow roses, and amid a suddenly frozen silence, presented it to Aunt Mary Maria, who, with lisped congratulations and good wishes. A chorus of admiration went up from the table, but Aunt Mary Maria did not join in. The the twins will blow out the candles for you, Auntie, faltered Anne nervously, and then will you cut the birthday cake? Not being quite senile yet, Annie, I can blow the candles out myself. Aunt Mary Maria proceeded to blow them out painstakingly and deliberately. With equal painstaking and deliberation, she cut the cake. Then she laid the knife down. And now, perhaps I may be excused, Annie. Such an old woman as I am needs rest after so much excitement. Swish went Aunt Mary Maria's taffeta skirt. What is wrong? Crash went the basket of roses as she swept past it. Click went Aunt Mary Maria's high heels up the stairs. Bang went Aunt Mary Maria's door in the distance. Ma'am, it is a birthday party. The dumbfounded guests ate their slices of birthday cake with such appetite as they could muster in a strained silence broken only by a story Mrs. Amos Martin told desperately of a doctor in Nova Scotia who had poisoned several inpatients by injecting diphtheria germs into them. The others, feeling this might not be in the best of taste, did not back up her laudable effort to liven things up, and all went away as soon as they decently could. A distracted Anne rushed to Aunt Mary Maria's room. Auntie, what is the matter? Was it necessary to advertise my age in public, Annie, and to ask Adela Carey here to have her find out how old I am? She's been dying to know for years. Auntie, we met, I don't know what your purpose was, Annie. That there is something back of all this I know very well. Oh, I can read your mind, dear Annie, but I shall not try to ferret it out. I shall leave it between you and your conscience. Aunt Mary Maria, my only intention was to give you a happy birthday. I'm dreadfully sorry. Aunt Mary Maria put her handkerchief to her eyes and smiled bravely. Of course I forgive you, Annie, but you must realize that after such a deliberate attempt to injure my feelings, I cannot stay here any longer. Auntie, won't you believe? Aunt Mary Maria lifted a long, thin, knobby hand. Don't let us discuss it, Annie. I want peace. Just peace. A wounded spirit. Who can bear? Anne went to the concert with Gilbert that night, but it could not be said she enjoyed it. Gilbert took the whole matter just like a man, as Miss Cornelia might have said. I remember she was always a little touchy about her age. Dad used to rag her. I should have warned you, but it had slipped my memory. If she goes, don't try to stop her, and refrained through clannishness from adding good riddance. She will not go. No such luck, Mrs. Doctor dear, said Susan incredulously. But for once, Susan was wrong. Aunt Mary Maria went away the very next day, forgiving everybody with her parting breath. Don't blame Annie, Gilbert, she said magnanimously. I acquit her of all intentional insult. I never minded her having secrets from me, though to a sensitive mind like mine. But in spite of everything, I've always liked poor Annie. This with the hair of one confessing a weakness. But Susan Baker is a cat of another color. My last word to you, Gilbert, is put Susan Baker in her place and keep her there. Nobody would believe in their good luck at first. Then they woke up to the fact that Aunt Mary Maria had really gone, that it was possible to laugh again without hurting anyone's feelings, open all the windows without anyone complaining of drafts, eat a meal without anyone telling you that something you especially liked was liable to produce cancer of the stomach. I've never sped a parting guest so willingly, thought Anne half guiltily. It is nice to call your soul your own again. The shrimp groomed himself meticulously, feeling that after all there was some fun in being a cat. The first peony burst into bloom in the garden. The world is just full of poetry, isn't it, Mummy? Said Walter. It is going to be a real nice June, foretold Susan. The almanac says so. There are going to be a few brides, and most likely at least 2 funerals. Does it not seem strange to be able to draw a free breath again? When I think that I did all that in my lay to prevent you from giving that party, Mrs. Doctor dear, I realize afresh that there is an overruling providence. And don't you think, Mrs. Doctor dear, that the doctor would relish some onions with his fried steak today?